I said I'd never amount to anything, but then the mayor walked over and thanked me by name. I'm Sarah Chen, 32 years old, and last Friday I stood in the back of the community center watching the annual Volunteer Appreciation Ceremony. For years, my family had dismissed my work as playing charity, while my brother Kevin built his tech empire. As Mayor Rodriguez began thanking key volunteers, I prepared to slip out quietly, like always. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Most importantly, I need to thank Sarah Chen, whose community garden project has transformed 6 neighborhoods and created over 200 jobs." The room erupted in applause. My parents, who were there supporting Kevin's wife's PTA award, turned around with their jaws on the floor. Before I tell you about the moment that changed everything between my family and me, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been the family member whose dreams were considered unrealistic, while everyone else's ambitions were celebrated. Growing up in San Francisco's Richmond district, I was the odd one out in the Chen family. My parents, David and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and engineering degrees. Dad became a software architect at a major tech company, while Mom earned her MBA and climbed the corporate ladder at a financial firm. Success in our household was measured in salary figures, stock options, and prestigious job titles. Then there was Kevin and me. Kevin, my older brother by 4 years, seemed genetically programmed for the success my parents valued. By age 10, he was building computers from spare parts. By 15, he was freelancing as a web developer. He graduated valedictorian, got into Stanford for computer science, and launched his first startup before his senior year. "Why can't you be more focused like Kevin?" became the soundtrack of my adolescence. Not that I was failing by any measure. I maintained A- averages, played violin in the school orchestra, and volunteered at the local food bank every weekend. But in the Chen household, being well-rounded was seen as being unfocused. "Sarah has potential," my high school counselor told my parents during junior year conferences. "She has this remarkable ability to connect with people from all backgrounds." Her essay about food insecurity was one of the most compassionate pieces I've read. That evening, I overheard my mother's response. "Compassion doesn't pay student loans." While Kevin coded his way through high school, I was drawn to community issues. At 16, I started a tutoring program for immigrant children whose parents worked late shifts. What began with 3 kids in our garage grew to 15 families. I taught basic English, helped with homework, and connected families with resources they didn't know existed. "It's nice that Sarah enjoys her hobby," my father told relatives at Chinese New Year dinner. But Kevin's startup just got seed funding. Real innovation, real impact. The tutoring program, which had helped dozens of families navigate school systems and college applications, was dismissed as a teenage phase. The defining moment came during my senior year. Mrs. Nguyen, an elderly Vietnamese woman from my tutoring program, had been scammed out of her life savings by predatory lenders targeting non-English speakers. I spent weeks researching consumer protection laws, helping her file complaints, and connecting her with legal aid. Eventually, we recovered most of her money and got the scam operation shut down. The local Vietnamese language newspaper ran a story about it, featuring a photo of Mrs. Nguyen and me at the legal aid office. I was proud, until dinner that night. "Mom saw your newspaper thing," Kevin said, not looking up from his laptop. "She's worried about how it looks, you getting involved in other people's financial problems." He glanced at me briefly. "Maybe focus on your own future instead of fixing everyone else's problems." That night, I lay awake wondering why helping someone recover their stolen savings was somehow less valuable than Kevin's latest app that helped people order premium coffee. By graduation, the family dynamic was set in stone. Kevin was the tech prodigy destined for greatness. I was the well-meaning daughter who needed to get serious about her career. When college acceptation letters arrived, I had gotten into UC Berkeley for social work, along with several other schools. Kevin had already deferred his Stanford PhD to focus on his startup, which had just secured Series A funding. My parents' reaction to my acceptances was polite but lukewarm. "Berkeley's a good school," my mother said carefully. "But social work? The salary prospects are..." She didn't finish the sentence, but her expression said everything. That summer, Kevin's startup was acquired by Google for $50 million. He was 22 years old and suddenly a multi-millionaire. The celebration party my parents threw filled our entire house with tech industry executives, investors, and family friends. I helped serve appetizers while listening to conversations about IPOs, valuations, and Kevin's next venture. "And what are you studying?" a family friend asked me during the party. "Social work," I replied. Her smile became strained. "Oh, that's meaningful." Meanwhile, across the room, Kevin was discussing his next startup idea with potential investors. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone, including me. At Berkeley, I thrived in ways my family couldn't see or understand. I double majored in social work and urban planning, driven by Professor Martinez, who became the mentor I desperately needed. "You have a gift for seeing systems," she told me after I presented a paper on food deserts in urban areas. "Most students see individual problems. You see connections, the root causes. That's how real change happens." For the first time, someone valued my different way of thinking as a strength rather than a distraction from more practical pursuits. During my sophomore year, I launched the Campus Food Security Initiative. What started as a small food pantry in the student center basement grew into a comprehensive program addressing hunger, nutrition education, and cooking skills. We partnered with local farms, created a campus garden, and developed a system where dining halls donated surplus food instead of throwing it away. The program served over 2,000 students monthly and eliminated food waste from campus dining. When I called home with the news that we'd won a national award for campus sustainability, my mother's response was distracted. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Kevin just opened his second office in Seattle?" My financial situation grew challenging as my parents increasingly focused their resources on Kevin's expanding business empire. "We're investing in his growth," my father explained when I asked about help with my senior year expenses. "You understand, right? He's creating jobs, building something substantial." I took on 3 part-time jobs: research assistant in the social work department, weekend shifts at a community health clinic, and evenings at a nonprofit that provided legal services to immigrants. Between work and classes, I survived on 4 hours of sleep, but the experience taught me more about social services delivery than any textbook could. Professor Martinez noticed my dedication and recommended me for a fellowship with the city planning department. The position was competitive. Only 2 students were selected from the entire UC system. When I got the call offering me the position, I felt proud for the first time in years. My parents' reaction was predictably tepid. "City planning," my mother repeated slowly. "Is that like architecture?" "More like urban policy and community development," I explained. "Oh." The disappointment in her voice was unmistakable. "Kevin's company just got featured in TechCrunch. They're predicting it'll be worth $500 million in 3 years. At graduation, I received my degree summa cum laude and won the Dean's Award for Community Impact. My parents attended but left immediately after the ceremony for Kevin's company's IPO celebration dinner. The timing wasn't coincidental. Kevin had planned it that way, though he'd never admit it. My first real career setback came 6 months after graduation. I'd been working as a program coordinator for a housing nonprofit when budget cuts eliminated my position. It was temporary, the kind of funding fluctuation common in nonprofit work. But my family saw it as confirmation of their concerns. "This is exactly why we wanted you to choose something more stable," my father said when I called with the news. "Kevin's offering good salaries at his company. Maybe it's time to be practical." That Thanksgiving, as we gathered around the table in my parents' new Palo Alto home, purchased with Kevin's success money, the conversation focused entirely on Kevin's latest venture, his engagement to Amanda, a Stanford MBA, and their plans for a destination wedding in Napa Valley. When attention briefly turned to me, my mother sighed. "Sarah's between jobs right now, still figuring things out." The dismissal stung, especially since I'd actually just started a new position as a community development specialist with the city of Oakland, a role that came with significant responsibility for neighborhood revitalization projects. I didn't bother correcting her. They'd already moved on to discussing Kevin's wedding guest list and whether they should invite certain tech industry figures. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would succeed in community work not despite my family's disapproval, but because I believed in the work itself. Their approval had become irrelevant to my sense of purpose. The mayor of Oakland, Rosa Rodriguez, noticed my work on the Broadway Corridor Revitalization Project. Where previous efforts had failed because they ignored community input, I spent months holding neighborhood meetings, listening to residents' concerns, and incorporating their ideas into our planning process. The result was a development that preserved neighborhood character while attracting new businesses. Crime dropped 40%, property values stabilized, and longtime residents stayed instead of being displaced. The project won a national award for community-centered urban planning. "You have a gift for building bridges," Mayor Rodriguez told me after the award ceremony. "People trust you because you actually listen. I need someone with your skills on my policy team." At 26, I became the youngest senior policy advisor in Oakland's history. My family never mentioned seeing the news coverage. Around this time, I met Marcus Williams, an environmental engineer who worked on sustainable infrastructure projects. Unlike my family, Marcus saw my work clearly from the beginning. "What you do matters more than what most people realize," he told me on our second date. "You're literally rebuilding communities. That's not charity work. That's economic development, public health, and social justice all rolled into one." In my role with the mayor's office, I discovered my talent for translating complex policy into community benefits. When the city received a $50 million federal grant for neighborhood improvement, I was tasked with designing the implementation strategy. Instead of top-down planning, I created a participatory budgeting process where residents voted on priorities. The results were remarkable: community gardens that provided fresh food and created local jobs, renovated parks that became safe gathering spaces, and small business incubators that supported local entrepreneurs. The program became a national model, with delegations from other cities visiting Oakland to study our approach. I was invited to speak at conferences, consulted on federal policy, and profiled in urban planning journals. When I called my parents about being featured in a Harvard Kennedy School case study on innovative governance, my mother's response was distracted. "That's nice, dear. Kevin and Amanda just bought a house in Atherton. 7 bedrooms, pool, wine cellar. The tech money is really working out." Meanwhile, Kevin's success continued escalating. His second startup went public, making him worth over $200 million. He and Amanda lived in a mansion, drove Teslas, and vacationed in places I couldn't pronounce. At family gatherings, my parents proudly shared updates about our son, the tech entrepreneur, while introducing me as their daughter who works for the city. The phrase stung because it made my work sound clerical rather than strategic. I was designing policies that affected hundreds of thousands of people, but they couldn't see past the government employee stereotype. During my third year with the mayor's office, Oakland faced a housing crisis that threatened to displace thousands of longtime residents. Mayor Rodriguez put me in charge of developing an emergency response plan. I worked 18-hour days for months, coordinating with nonprofits, developers, community groups, and federal agencies. We created an innovative program that combined affordable housing development with community ownership models, ensuring that growth would benefit existing residents rather than displacing them. The plan prevented 3,000 evictions, created 1,500 new affordable housing units, and established community land trusts that would keep neighborhoods affordable permanently. The federal government adopted our model for national housing policy. When President Obama's housing secretary visited Oakland to announce the federal adoption, she specifically mentioned my work. Sarah Chen's innovative approach proves that cities can grow without abandoning their existing communities. This is the future of American urban development. My parents saw the news coverage but never mentioned it. That weekend was Kevin's birthday party, where the conversation focused on his latest acquisition, a $30 million AI startup. What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that my housing work had caught the attention of national leaders. I'd been quietly consulting with senators on federal housing legislation, advising mayors across the country, and building a reputation as one of the leading voices in community-centered urban development. Everything changed when Mayor Rodriguez announced she wouldn't seek re-election. Political observers expected several city council members to run, along with a few state legislators. No one expected the mayor to call me into her office 3 months before the filing deadline. "I want you to consider running," she said without preamble. "You understand this city better than anyone. You've built relationships across every community, and you've proven you can create real change." The idea terrified and excited me simultaneously. Running for mayor would mean stepping into the spotlight I'd deliberately avoided, subjecting my work to political scrutiny, and competing against candidates with more traditional political backgrounds. But it also meant the opportunity to implement the comprehensive community development vision I'd been building for years. Marcus supported the decision immediately. "You'd be an incredible mayor," he said. "The question is whether you want the job." I did. For the first time in my life, I wanted something that aligned perfectly with both my values and my ambitions. I entered the race quietly, announcing my candidacy at the community garden I'd helped establish in West Oakland, the same neighborhood where I'd started my career in community development. My campaign was different from typical political efforts. Instead of traditional fundraisers, I held policy forums in community centers. Instead of attack ads, I published detailed proposals on housing, economic development, and environmental justice. Instead of consulting with political insiders, I built my platform through neighborhood listening sessions. I invited my family to my campaign launch. They didn't come. Kevin was in New York for a tech conference, and my parents were attending a wine tasting event in Sonoma. The primary was competitive, with 5 serious candidates, including 2 city council members and a former state legislator. Political commentators dismissed me as idealistic, lacking the political experience necessary for executive leadership. I won the primary with 44% of the vote, avoiding a runoff by just 300 votes. The general election opponent was a well-funded former tech executive who'd moved to Oakland specifically to run for mayor. Someone from Kevin's world who saw city government as a stepping stone to higher office. Throughout the campaign, my family remained conspicuously absent. They didn't donate, volunteer, or even put a yard sign in their yard. When a reporter asked about family support, I deflected. "I'm focused on earning the support of Oakland families." Election night arrived with polls showing a close race. Marcus and I watched results with my campaign team, the room tense as precincts reported. Around 11 p.m., my opponent called to concede. I'd won by just over 3,000 votes. As mayor-elect, I maintained the low-profile approach that had defined my career. I focused on building my administration, developing policy priorities, and preparing for the challenges ahead. My parents sent a generic congratulations card. Kevin texted, "Cool, congrats." My inauguration drew thousands of Oakland residents, community leaders I'd worked with over the years, and policy experts from across the country. Mayor Rodriguez, Professor Martinez, and others who'd believed in me were there. My parents attended but seemed uncomfortable with the attention and ceremony. During my first year as mayor, Oakland faced multiple crises that tested everything I'd learned about community-centered governance. A warehouse fire displaced 200 families. A drought threatened our water supply. Federal funding cuts endangered essential services. Each crisis became an opportunity to demonstrate a different approach to leadership, one that prioritized community input, collaborative problem-solving, and long-term thinking over quick fixes and political theater. The warehouse fire response became a national model for disaster recovery. Instead of relegating displaced families to temporary shelters, we created a comprehensive support system that included temporary housing, job placement services, childcare, and mental health support. Within 6 months, every displaced family had found permanent housing, and many had better situations than before the fire. Our drought response emphasized conservation and community resilience, rather than restrictions and penalties. We installed rainwater collection systems, created community water gardens, and launched education programs that reduced citywide water usage by 30%, while actually improving quality of life in many neighborhoods. When federal funding cuts threatened to close community health clinics, we developed an innovative public-private partnership that not only kept them open but expanded services. The model attracted national attention and was replicated in 15 other cities. 2 years into my term, Oakland's transformation was undeniable. Crime had dropped to historic lows. Unemployment fell by half. The affordable housing crisis was stabilizing. Environmental initiatives were reducing pollution while creating jobs. We'd balanced the budget while expanding services. National media took notice. Time magazine featured Oakland in a cover story about innovative city government. The Harvard Business Review published a case study on our public-private partnerships. I was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum about urban sustainability. My parents saw some of this coverage but never mentioned it. Our conversations remained polite but distant, focused on weather and holidays rather than the work consuming my life. Then came the community garden project that would change everything between us. 3 years into my term, I launched the most ambitious initiative of my career, the Oakland Community Wealth Building Project. The idea was to transform vacant lots across the city into productive community spaces that would provide fresh food, create jobs, and build neighborhood connections. What started as a pilot program in 5 neighborhoods expanded to 37 sites across Oakland. Each garden was designed by residents, managed by community members, and integrated with local schools, health clinics, and small businesses. The gardens produced over 200,000 pounds of fresh food annually, created 200 permanent jobs, and generated $3.2 million in local economic activity. More importantly, they became centers of community life, where neighbors connected across cultural and economic differences. The program attracted visitors from around the world. Delegations from cities in Brazil, Kenya, and South Korea came to study our model. The United Nations featured it in a report on urban sustainability. I was invited to present the program at the Global Mayors Summit in Paris. My parents never asked about any of it. At family dinners, conversations still focused on Kevin's latest business ventures, his and Amanda's elaborate vacations, and their new house in Portola Valley. Then came the annual volunteer appreciation ceremony that would reveal everything. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening at the Community Center in North Oakland, one of the neighborhoods most transformed by our community development initiatives. As mayor, I usually attended such events briefly, making remarks and then leaving for other commitments. This year felt different. The Community Garden Project was being recognized alongside traditional volunteer efforts, and I wanted to hear residents speak about its impact in their own words. I arrived early and took a seat in the back, avoiding the reserved front row seats for dignitaries. I preferred listening to being honored, understanding impact through community voices rather than official presentations. As people filled the room, I noticed my parents enter with Amanda, Kevin's wife. She was receiving recognition for her work with the PTA at their children's private school. Kevin was traveling, as usual, but my parents had come to support their daughter-in-law. They didn't notice me in the back corner. I watched them take seats in the middle section, my mother adjusting Amanda's corsage while my father checked his phone. Mayor Rodriguez, I'd appointed her as my deputy mayor after winning election, began the ceremony by recognizing traditional volunteers, tutors, coaches, mentors, and organizers who kept Oakland's communities strong. Then she moved to the Community Garden Project. This year, we're celebrating an initiative that has transformed how we think about community development, she began. What started as a simple idea, turning vacant lots into productive spaces, has become a model for cities worldwide. She talked about the impact: jobs created, food produced, neighborhoods strengthened. She shared stories from garden participants, including elderly residents who'd found purpose in teaching young people about gardening, and teenagers who'd discovered career interests in sustainable agriculture. But programs don't create themselves, Mayor Rodriguez continued. They require vision, persistence, and leadership that puts community needs first. I prepared to slip out quietly, as I usually did before the individual recognitions. But then I heard my name. Most importantly, I need to thank Sarah Chen, whose community garden project has transformed 6 neighborhoods and created over 200 jobs. The room erupted in applause. Garden participants stood, clapping enthusiastically. Community leaders whistled and cheered. The sound was overwhelming, months of work being acknowledged by the people it had actually served. My parents turned around with expressions I'd never seen before. Shock, certainly, but also something like recognition, as if they were seeing me clearly for the first time. Amanda looked confused, glancing between my parents and me. "Wait," she said loudly enough for nearby people to hear. "That's Kevin's sister. She's the mayor?" More heads turned. People began whispering, connecting dots between the Chen family they knew socially and the mayor who'd been transforming their city. Mayor Rodriguez continued speaking, but I barely heard her words over my racing thoughts. For years, I'd succeeded in work that mattered to me while remaining invisible to my family. Now, in a moment I hadn't planned or expected, those two worlds were colliding. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared refreshments, my parents approached me slowly. My mother's eyes were wide, processing the evening's revelation. "All this time," she said quietly, "you've been the mayor of Oakland, and we never." "Would it have mattered?" I asked gently. "If you'd known my job title, would it have changed how you see my work?" My father looked around the room, taking in the diverse crowd of community leaders, activists, and residents who were still discussing the evening's presentations. "All these people," he said slowly, "they all know you, respect you." "The work speaks for itself," I replied. "It always has." Amanda was still processing. "But Kevin never mentioned, we knew you worked for the city, but mayor?" She shook her head. "Do you know how many tech executives would kill for a meeting with you? The policy connections alone?" I almost laughed at her attempt to translate my work into terms Kevin's world would understand. But then I saw something shift in my parents' expressions. "The community gardens," my mother said suddenly. "I read about those in the Chronicle. That was your project?" "One of many," I confirmed. My father was quiet for a long moment, watching residents continue discussing the evening's presentations. Finally, he spoke. "When you were young, helping those families with their English, organizing the tutoring program, we thought it was we didn't understand it was leading to this." It was always this," I said softly. "You just couldn't see it." Over the following weeks, my relationship with my family slowly began to change. My parents started asking about my work, real questions about policy challenges, community response, and the mechanics of city government. Kevin called for the first time in months. "Amanda told me about the volunteer thing," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar tone. "I had no idea about the scope of what you're doing. The community gardens, the housing stuff. It's impressive." "It's always been impressive," I replied gently. "You just weren't looking." 3 months later, Kevin surprised me by showing up at a city council meeting where we were voting on an expansion of the community garden program. Afterward, he approached me with a proposal. "My company has developed some apps for urban agriculture monitoring," he said. "Soil sensors, water management, crop tracking. We've been looking for a pilot program. Would Oakland be interested?" For the first time, Kevin was offering to support my work rather than expecting me to admire his. The pilot program worked beautifully, improving garden productivity by 40% while creating a tech application that other cities could use. Kevin waived his usual licensing fees for government clients, making the technology freely available to any city with community garden programs. At the program launch, my parents attended as supporters rather than skeptical observers. I watched my mother talking enthusiastically with garden participants, asking detailed questions about their growing techniques and community impact. "I never realized," she told me afterward, "how much expertise this requires. The coordination, the economics, the community engagement. It's like running a business but for public benefit." "It is running a business," I confirmed, "just with different success metrics." As I finish sharing this story, I think about how success can be invisible when it doesn't match other people's expectations. For years, I was building communities, creating jobs, and changing lives, while my family saw only a government employee with unclear career prospects. The volunteer appreciation ceremony didn't change my work. It had always been impactful. It changed my family's ability to see that impact. Sometimes the most meaningful recognition comes not from career achievements, but from the moment when people who matter to you finally understand what you've been building all along. How do you handle it when your definition of success doesn't match your family's expectations? Have you ever had a moment when people suddenly realized the value of work they'd previously dismissed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding your path and creating impact, even when others can't see your vision. Thank you for listening, and remember, meaningful work speaks for itself, even when it takes time for others to hear it.